Dr. Jessica Friedman. I hope everyone is doing well today. We are going to discuss application entries for medical school applications today. And we are largely going to answer your questions because it seems that that's what our students and our clients like, and our parents at this time of the year, because we are really sort of heavily into the admissions season, the upcoming admission season at this point, working with students on their personal statements, their application entries, coming up with their school lists, their strategies, should they apply, shouldn't they apply. And so, you know, this is kind of a really very busy time of year for us at MedEdits, and it should be a busy time of year for you if you are applying to medical school right now. There are three major application services, and this is something we go over at every webcast, but it's important to review. The first one is AMCAS, which is the allopathic application service. The second is TMDSAS, which is the Texas application service, and the third is AACOMAS, which is the osteopathic application service. And a lot of our students apply to one of those services, but many apply to two. So there are some students who apply to both allopathic and osteopathic medical schools, and then the majority, obviously, of Texas residents also apply through TMDSAS. Some out-of-state students also apply through that service as well, depending on sort of their goals, their geographic preferences, and things of that nature. So for AMCAS, there are two types of application entries that you need to be aware of. You have your regular application entries, which are 700 characters with spaces, and then of those application entries, of which you have 15 opportunities, you must select 3 of those to be what we call most meaningfuls, or what AMCAS calls most meaningfuls. And in those most meaningfuls, you elaborate on why the experience was important to you. What did you learn? Why was it transformative? And that really gives you the opportunity to expand upon what you might have observed, what you might have gained, and kind of how that experience was important to you. If you are applying through AACOMAS, your application entries are only 600 characters with spaces, and that was a recent change. The vast majority of students who are applying to both AMCAS and AACOMAS will keep their descriptions to 600 characters so they can use them for both application systems, and that works pretty well. Texas is very different. You only have 300 characters to use for every entry that you put in, for every experience, and so that is very, very limiting. And so for the TMDSAS application entries, we encourage our students to kind of really just present the nuts and bolts of the experience, as opposed to when you have 700 characters even, you can sometimes go a little bit beyond just the nuts and bolts, what you did, what your roles and responsibilities were. And you can actually expand upon, even without having that most meaningful description, you can actually expand upon maybe something about what you learned from the experience, even if it's just a sentence. Some people will say to us, well, I've heard that I should just write in bullets and I shouldn't go into any details. And our advice is always, yes, there's some people who prefer a bulleted entry. There's some people when reviewing applications, they prefer to read less rather than more. However, if you write less, then for the person who actually would rather read more, you're not giving them anything. So we encourage people to take advantage of the space that they are given. And for the reviewer who wants to read less, they can just skim the entry, as opposed to the person who really wants to learn more about you, who wants to get a sense of who you are, why things are important to you, why you want to go to medical school. For those people, they will most likely read through the entire application from cover to cover, so to speak. So we encourage applicants to sort of present their applications so they have very, very broad appeal, because this is not as formulaic as one thinks, and the point is that your application needs to have very broad appeal for a very broad range of people who might be reading your application, because this is just like any admissions or interview or job admissions process. There is a huge degree of subjectivity that influences who gets in, who is granted an interview, and so you really want to kind of have that depth in your application so you can appeal to as many people as you possibly can. So with that, because I know there are going to be a lot of questions, because again, all application systems are now open. AMCAS is not accepting submissions yet, but the application system is open. So if you are applying to medical school in this upcoming cycle, you should be working on all of your documents at this point. If you're not, don't panic, you're not late, but you should get started soon is our recommendation, because certainly submitting an early application benefits the applicant, because they are competing against fewer people in the admissions process. You're being reviewed with fewer people, because not everyone submits early. And number two, it really leads to much less stress for the applicant, because when you submit early, everything else follows. You get early interviews, you get early acceptances, and so it really, really helps to be submitting early. So let's go ahead and let's get started with our questions.
Okay. So can you go over some of the sections for what is expected on what are the more important activities that should be discussed, such as we're talking about research, teaching, community service.
So what are some of the important activities that should be discussed in your application? And the answer really is anything that is important to you that you have done recently or that you have done since undergraduate college. Only very, very significant high school activities should be discussed in the medical school application. At this point, people are more concerned about your more recent activities. So being in the Key Club in high school maybe isn't so important. If you were a varsity athlete and you still play sports as a hobby, then you can mention that as part of your hobby entry for athletics, for example. Certainly all shadowing or clinically relevant experiences should be highlighted in the application entries. You should write about those. Really, shadowing and clinical exposure, even though it's not stated to be so, is essentially a prerequisite for medical school. Any research that you have done, certainly that's extremely important. Also, we consider to be somewhat a prerequisite for medical school. You should write about all of your community service activities, any teaching experiences, and then those things that maybe aren't related to medicine directly. So if you have some unusual hobby, if you've done something unusual, so really anything that is important to you that you would want to discuss during an interview, you want to write about in your application entries. Don't feel that you have to max out the space. So in AMCAS, you were given 15 opportunities to write about 15 different experiences. You don't have to enter 15 experiences. That's perfectly fine if you have 10. When you start getting down to 3 or 4, that becomes a little bit suspect. Something else, don't write about one-day experiences. These, generally speaking, are not all that significant. It makes it seem as though that you are filling the space. The experiences that will be valued more by admissions committees are those that show quality of experience, depth of experience. So it's about quality versus quantity.
Okay, if I've volunteered or shadowed with many different physicians, or researchers, should I put them on separate lines or should we clump them together?
So the question is, if I've shadowed with multiple physicians, should I put that into one entry or should I include that in multiple entries? And really this depends once again on the how important the experience was to you, how long was the experience. So let's say you've shadowed 5 different physicians and you've shadowed each of them for one day. Then I'd say, okay, put those together in one single entry. However, if you shadowed one physician, for 3 weeks or for a month over the summer, and then you shadowed 3 others just for a day, then those can be split into 2 entries. So you can be, and a lot of this also depends on how much you have to write. So if you have a lot to say, then you want to use your space to your advantage, but you always have the option to split up entries as needed. So our general advice to people is, write about your observations, write about what you learned, write about your insights, and then see how much you have to say, and then decide, should this go into 1, 2, or even 3 entries? You know, it really depends on the nature of the experience.
So if we clump the entries together and we have to put a contact person, do we put a contact person for everyone?
So the question is, if you clump entries together and you need to put a contact person, do you put everybody? And everyone gets very hung up on contact people. Put down one person. I've never heard of admissions people contacting the contact. You know, so this is sort of more of a formality than anything else. And I don't think, you know, people get so sort of worked up and waste a lot of energy on who should my contact be. Choose the contact you know the best. And, you know, no one's going to reach out to that person.
I'm going to try to project my voice so everybody can hear this. But one thing that we get asked a lot is there are all these, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of different activities categories, right, that you can speak about. Is it important that I cover every single category, or can I just cherry pick the ones that are important for me?
So the question is, there are a lot of different categories that you can choose from in a drop-down menu when you enter your experience. And you know, the question is, should you choose do you have to have something in every category? And the answer is no, you don't. And those categories are self-determined. So you want to choose the category that best reflects what the experience was. So again, don't try to force something. You know, this is all about being authentic and being honest. And the more authentic and honest and sincere your application is, the better that it will be perceived. So, you know, whenever you try to sort of be fake in any way, or you try to manipulate information, that's when you get yourself in trouble, because the good interviewers, the good reviewers, they can sort of see through that. So if you don't have an experience even in a major category, you know, that's who you are. So try not to be stressed out about it. However, if you don't have clinical experience and you're applying to medical school, and by clinical experience, I don't mean actually working with patients. You can't do that as a pre-medical student. But if you don't have any clinical exposure in terms of working in doctor's offices, shadowing, you know, working as an EMT, you know, all those different things that might qualify as clinical exposure, that's something that I would say you need to have before applying to medical school, and research too. You know, we just find that our successful students are the ones who definitely have experiences in those 2 categories. So we really consider those prerequisites to a medical school application.
Can you go over the basics of the most meaningful experiences? What distinguishes a most meaningful experience from?
So the question is, what distinguishes a most meaningful experience from a regular description? And this is in AMCAS. So AMCAS has 2 types of entries. You have descriptions. You have 15 activity descriptions that you must write. You don't have to do all 15, but up to 15. And in those descriptions, you are given 700 characters with spaces, and you should use that space to write about what your role was, what you did. You can, if you have extra space, you can write about the significance of the experience or what you learned from the experience. Of those 15 experiences, you select up to 3. AMCAS will tell you don't have to select up to 3, you only have to select 1, but we advise our students you must select 3. And so of those up to 15 experiences, you select 3 that you consider to be your most meaningful. And then in your most meaningful description, you have an additional 1,325 characters with spaces for those 3 entries. And you use that space to elaborate on why that experience was meaningful to you, what you learned, what you observed. You know, this is sort of your opportunity to kind of really showcase what you've done, you know, how your observations are distinctive among other applicants. Everyone always asks, well, how can I stand out? And the way that you stand out is that you show insight and you show maturity in terms of, you know, what you've observed and what you've learned from each of your opportunities, and that's really how you distinguish yourself.
Okay, so this question comes from a student who has been doing some online research on the best strategies to get into medical school. And they were given advice by an MCAT tutor, and the MCAT tutor said the trick is to apply early. So send your application as early as possible, then take the MCAT and put down a school that you don't want to attend, do not want to attend, okay? And wait for your MCAT score to come back. If you like your score, you apply broadly. If you don't like your score, then, you know.
Okay, this is an interesting strategy.
What do you think of that
So
strategy?
somebody online was given the advice that, and this is someone obviously who has not yet taken the MCAT, is wanting to apply to medical school this year, but isn't so sure if they will apply to medical school based on what their MCAT score may be. So they are receiving the advice that you complete an application, that you apply to one medical school that you don't want to attend, and then if you're happy with your score, you then add other schools. It's an interesting strategy. I don't know that it's a bad one, to be honest, but I think there are some downfalls to it. First of all, completing a really great medical school application takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and a lot of energy. So you, number one, have to ask yourself, do you want to expend all of that effort and energy while you're studying for your MCAT? Number two, depends on when you are taking the MCAT. If you're taking the MCAT in June, even, you know, one of the early July tests, you can by all means apply to medical school and it won't be too late. If, however, you're taking the MCAT in August, it's too late, in our opinion. Our students who apply in August, we tell them, you can try, but you're not going to have the success that you would have if you applied in June or July. So we are cautious in having students apply in August. Certainly there are some students who do apply, they get into medical school, maybe they might have had more chances or more opportunities and more choices had they applied earlier in the cycle. Also, if you're taking the MCAT this summer, based on your preparation, you should have an idea of how you're doing on that MCAT. You know, are you in the 500 range or are you in the 520 range? You know, so that's going to give you a pretty strong indicator of whether you're going to be ready to apply this summer. If you're in the 500 range, then maybe you need to study more, figure out, you know, kind of where your weaknesses are, and strategize over the summer and into the fall and take that MCAT when you're really ready. If you're in the 520 range, then yeah, go ahead. And, you know, the chances that, you know, you'll be applying to really great schools is probably pretty high. So I can see the benefits of that strategy, but you really have to weigh it all very, very carefully.
Right. And in the case of that student, they're taking the MCAT in January 2018. So.
Oh, the student.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, if you're taking the MCAT in January 2018, you can't even apply this year because unless you have an old MCAT, that's being considered. But if that MCAT's low, then you're not going to get interviews potentially, depending on how low it is. So I'm not. We would need to know more specifics about that situation.
Right. Okay. What about the MCAT? Taking the MCAT at the end of July, is that too late?
Taking the MCAT at the end of July, is that too late? It depends. Just like so many other things. If you have a 3.9 and you are a phenomenal applicant and you anticipate, you're a good test taker and you anticipate doing really, really well in the MCAT, no, it's not too late. If you have a 3.2, 3.3, you're kind of in the 502 range on your practice tests right now, then that's risky. You know, so we look at all these things individually in terms of making these recommendations. We certainly have students who apply, who take the MCAT in July, and who apply and who do very, very well. And we have others who take the MCAT in July and they get back a score that's horribly disappointing and they end up withdrawing. So, you know, it really depends on the individual situation, kind of where you are academically and where you are in terms of your test taking.
Okay. Let's talk about titles and contacts. How would you recommend people list titles and contacts in the entry headings?
Okay, so the question is about titles and contacts and entry headings, and we've already discussed contacts, and you should just choose the person who you know the best for a contact. Don't get, you know, sort of too preoccupied with that. It really doesn't matter. In terms of heading, use the heading that best describes the activity. You know, so yes, we have students who sometimes are just, you know, they're really focused on this aspect of the application itself, and really, you know, kind of what you enter as the title of the experience, you know, needs to needs to best represent what the experience is. So when then a reviewer reads it, they say, oh, yeah, shadowed neurosurgeon, Dr. So-and-so. They know what that is, right? So it's sort of, when they read it, they know what they're going to be reading about.
Okay. Let's talk now about how to list hours appropriately. That's always a question.
The question is about listing hours. Again, be honest. Summarize the hours. You don't, for an activity to be significant, you don't need to have 999 hours. So be honest. That really is what we always tell people. Be as accurate as you can be and be honest in terms of how you've spent your time.
Okay. The next question comes from a student who wants to know about, and I know we've talked about this before, but about how much overlap should be in a personal statement versus activities entry.
Okay, so the question is, how much overlap should there be in activities entries and your personal statement? Essentially, any activity that you mention in your personal statement should also be included in your activities entries. The activities entry should be a comprehensive list and descriptions with corresponding descriptions of all of your activities, everything that you've done that is meaningful to you. The vast majority of students, in fact, all students, will write about topics in their personal statement that are also most meaningful in their application, and that is simply because the vast majority of students at this age, the vast majority of people in their lifetimes, only have a certain number of really significant and formative experiences in their lives. So for our students, the vast majority will write about experiences that are their most meaningful and will also write about those in their personal statements. The key is that you take a slightly different approach when writing about each of those experiences in each of those two places. So obviously you don't want the same language, so you want to write about a different aspect of the experience in each of those two documents. So it isn't sort of too repetitive for the reviewer, and so that it kind of shows that that you did take away different lessons from that experience. And also the personal statement's different. That's your story. You want your story to have flow. So the way you're going to write about that experience in your personal statement is going to be very different than the way you'll approach it in your application entries.
Okay. So we're getting some questions about personal statements. So we'll answer those. And I think we've answered a few of these, but we'll go back to them. Is it okay to write about topics unrelated to medicine? So
the question is, we're transitioning slightly to personal statements. It's very hard to just discuss application entries without discussing personal statements. That's totally okay. Is it okay to discuss topics unrelated to medicine? Absolutely. Your reviewer wants to know who you are as a human being. They want to know what experiences have been the most important to you. Obviously, this is an application for medical school, so you want to be focusing primarily on why you're interested in medicine and what experiences have sort of been the most influential in terms of helping you decide to become a doctor, and what you've learned about medicine, science, all of service, teaching. But most people, especially smart people who are going into medicine, have interests outside of medicine. So by all means, you should write about those experiences in your personal statement potentially, as well as in your application.
Okay. Is it okay to write about, in your personal statement, activities that took place before college?
Is it okay to write in your personal statement activities that took place before college? Within the context of your larger story, that is okay, and we actually encourage that if something is significant to a student. And this is because it gives context to who you are, how you've evolved, how you've developed your interests. But we discourage people from sort of monopolizing the essay with experiences that have happened before college. But certainly they can be mentioned and discussed based on their level of significance to you.
Okay, if I'm reapplying to medical school, do I need to rewrite my activities entries and my personal statement?
If I'm reapplying to medical school, do I need to rewrite my application entries and my personal statement? Application entries, no, not necessarily, unless they need improvement. If you're reapplying to medical school, you need to really analyze, why am I reapplying? Why didn't I get in last year? Can I improve upon my application? You probably can. If you weren't accepted, there are probably things you can do to improve your content. So that's number one. However, let's say your entries are top notch, and for the experiences that obviously were ended at that point when you submitted and you haven't picked them up again, those application entries don't necessarily need to be rewritten. The personal statement with an entire year behind you, you've probably done something that was different than what you did last year. So probably your personal statement at the very least needs to be somewhat restructured and looked at again. Also a year of maturity, sometimes you'll have different insights about things. And so we always encourage students when they're reapplying to really kind of go back and use that as an opportunity to improve things and to make them different, not even so much for the admissions officers who aren't going to remember what they read last year, but for you, so you feel better about applying. So much about doing well in this process, especially once you're in the interview seat, is about, being confident in what you've put forth and put out there.
I have an institutional action as an undergrad. Does that mean I have no chance of getting into medical school?
I have an institutional action. How do I write about it? And if that box is filled in on my application, does it mean I'm not getting in? And we have many, many students we work with who have institutional actions that get into medical school. There are some institutional actions, frankly, are somewhat bogus, and it depends on, how you write about it, what you write, what you did. Academic dishonesty is something that certainly medical schools frown upon quite significantly, so that can sometimes be a deal breaker. But sometimes someone might just have, a situation where, they were super stressed out. It was an easy class. They glanced at their classmates' paper. They weren't even, it almost was, someone saw them, and it sort of becomes this big deal. And the key when writing about institutional action is to write about very, very concretely what happened. Don't try to gloss it over, and to write about what you learned, and to write about, the regret. Yes, I did this. I know it was terrible. These are the actions I've taken. This is what I've learned about myself. This is what I've learned, kind of about the importance of, being honest, and about integrity, and so don't make excuses is what you don't want to make excuses when writing about institutional action, and you want to write about kind of you want to seem regretful. Yeah, hopefully you are regretful. Most students we work with who have institutional actions, it's all they can talk about, because they just feel like they've their futures are doomed, and that's not the case. Many students have that box filled out. It doesn't mean that when someone's reviewing your application that they see that box is filled out and they stop reading. They keep reading. So many people with institutional action boxes filled in get into medical school.
Okay, so this student contacted our office and said that, and was interested in editing, and wanted to understand a little bit better our philosophy on editing. They want to understand why they can't just submit something to be proofread once and be done with it.
So there's someone who has a question about our editing process, and why they can't just submit a document for editing in particular to us and just kind of get it proofread and then move on. And our editing process is not just editing, and that is really what we feel distinguishes our services. We don't just go through and edit a document. We actually look at your background. We consider what distinguishes you. Number one, we then will really prompt you to offer more information. So we try to get you to go beyond the superficial. So as part of our editing process, we ask you a lot of questions. We try to sort of push you further. We won't ever write your materials because that would, potentially ruin your future in medical school admissions. I realize in other admissions processes that might not be the case, but certainly in medicine that could be. So we really try to push you to kind of go deeper into your experiences. Sometimes students don't even realize that something in their backgrounds might be distinguishing and might sort of set them apart. It might even be a topic that we say, oh my gosh, this is something wonderful you should write about, and they're like, I didn't want to write about that. And so we have a conversation about the different things that we think as objective outsiders that we feel are important to you and to your background and to your candidacy as a whole. And we sort of have a discussion about what topics should be included, what topics shouldn't be included. That as well is a very, very important conversation. Sometimes a student might think that an experience is very important and should definitely be included in the personal statement. And we decide, you know what? Maybe that just goes in the application entries. And I don't mean to use the word just, because the application entries are equally important and as important as a personal statement. So you want those two documents really working together to your benefit. So sometimes we might say, you know what? Leave that experience out of the personal statement because it doesn't really work with your overall story, the overall flow. It's almost disruptive. And instead, write about that as the most meaningful, and then maybe that becomes one of those most meaningful experiences that's not included in the statement but is included in the application entries. So for med edits, our editing process is much more sophisticated than editing, and that's really what distinguishes us in terms of a medical school admissions consulting company, of which there are so many to choose from at this point. So you want to choose very carefully.
Is 42 years old too old to apply to medical school?
Is 42 years old too old to apply to medical school? No. We've worked with people who are in their 50s and, believe it or not, 60s who've applied to medical school successfully. So no, everyone has their own path to medicine. So go for it.
Okay. This student is concerned about how the topics covered in the primary application will relate to the topics covered in secondary essays.
Okay, so the question is how will topics, sometimes students will say to us, should I save topics for secondary essays? And what if I've written about something in my primary application and they ask about it in the secondary essay? It's important to understand the purpose of secondary essays. And when you apply to medical school, every medical school will send you a secondary application for the most part. Some schools will do this selectively, but the vast majority send them automatically. And the purpose of the secondary essay for most medical schools is to try and get information from a student that they feel is important that most students don't include in their primary application. Now when we work with students, because our students submit such comprehensive applications, they are often they are often almost it's required of them to repeat information that's also in the primary, which is completely fine. The key when you are answering a secondary essay is to answer the prompt and to read the prompt, and don't try to go too far off course. So if you are forced by the nature of a prompt to repeat information that is already in your primary application, that's okay. Again, you don't want to put anything verbatim. You don't want to repeat content word for word. But if there's topic overlap because you are forced to do that, that's completely okay. The only time that might not be okay is when a prompt specifically says do not include anything that you've already included in your primary application, and that will happen from time to time, but that's the minority and not the majority.
Okay, I've been told that I have to submit June 1st. Is that true? And if it's not true, do I still have time to work with med edits?
Okay, so the question is, do I need to apply at the opening bell in June? And if I'm not ready to apply in June, do I still have time to work with med edits? And the question is, you don't need, or the answer is you don't need to apply at the opening bell. It's great if you can, but if you can't, that's all right. And yes, you have plenty of time to work with med edits. We continue working with students on their primary applications into August. Yes, there are those students who contact us in August and they want help with their personal statements, their application entries. Again, we encourage them to let us do what we call a game plan session to really try to evaluate, should they be applying in August? There are some students who can apply in August and they're successful in the process, but there are many who will not be successful in the process when they apply in August. So we first try to make that determination. There are some students who say, look, I don't care what you say, I'm applying in August, and we say, okay, good, let's try to get the best application out there we can get. So certainly we are working with students who are accepted to medical school throughout, up through July certainly, and into August.
Okay. And this this applicant's question is, does MedEdits help write personal statements?
Does MedEdits help write personal statements? We will not write documents for you. We wouldn't be in business if we did that, because you would all get in trouble. Medical school admissions, again, as I've mentioned previously, is very, very different than other admissions processes. Someone will sit down with you, they will interview you. They can get a sense of whether or not what is written in that personal statement is who you are sitting in front of them. So we would be doing a major disservice if we wrote your personal statement. So no, we do not write your personal statement, but we will, however, push you to give the best of you that's out there. We will get you to put forth your absolute best writing. We will get you to put forth your best ideas and your best insights. And we'll also help you to sort of select what topics are going to be those topics that will help distinguish you as an applicant. And so that's really what we do, and that's how we get our students to put forth the strongest applications they can.
Okay, I think that's it.
All right, thank you very much, and good luck to everybody this cycle. If you're not applying this cycle and you're watching this a year in advance, awesome. And if you are applying this cycle, just keep going. You're not too late. You're right in the thick of it at this moment, and you have plenty of time to put together something terrific. So good luck. Thank you.
Okay.